Meat does not get better than this. I am a chef, a food show host, and a cookbook author, and am extremely passionate about combining traditional South African flavors with modern cooking techniques to create recipes that bring people together. I'm Zola Nene. Welcome to my Checkers Masterclass on top meat cuts. I grew up experiencing meat cooked at its best at family gatherings. So big weddings or big birthdays where the men in my family were responsible for cooking the meat over open flame, and they never flavored it with anything fancy, just simple salt, and cooked it on hot coals, and straight off the fire we would slice it and enjoy the meat, and it would taste delicious. In the vast selection of steakhouse classic cuts that are available at Checkers, for me, my favorite cut has got to be the T-bone steak. It's the best of both worlds steak. It's got a beautiful fat cap on the porterhouse side, and it's got beautiful lean tender meat on the fillet side. I love a good T-bone. Now, I know that it can be really intimidating for novice cooks walking into the butchery section of a supermarket, so I'm here to give you a helping hand in deciding the perfect cut for your occasion. So the first thing you need to do is decide, what is the meat being used for? Are you making a stew? Are you making a roast? Or are you braising or pan frying your meat? This will determine the type of meat that you're looking for. So for a stew, for example, you want to use something that has a lot of sinew. All of that sinew, that fat, will add texture to your stew, so you cook it slowly and for a really long time. Let's kick it off with the lamb for your braai. So here we've got the Simple Truth certified natural lamb, exclusive to Checkers, no hormones, and delicious in flavor. So if you're the type of person who likes a crispy, fatty lamb chop for your braai, then a loin chop or a rib chop is perfect for you. They are easy to turn on the braai, they don't take that much time, and for me, what I recommend is that you cook it on the fat side first, so you get that ultimate crispy fat. If you're like my family and love a big chunk of meat, then the lamb leg chops are perfect for you. They have less fat around and they have a solid piece of meat, and there's always some marrow in that bone, so really flavorful. And with the lamb, you can marinate it in however you want, flavor it with fresh herbs, and that straight on the braai, wonderful. Let's stick with the lamb, but let's talk roast. This is a beautiful lamb leg roast. Lots of fat on it, and you'll see I requested that the butcher keep it on the long bone. So make sure that you make use of your Checkers butchers. They will cut the meat according to your specifications. When choosing a roast, I always recommend that you keep it on the bone. The bone acts as an insulator for the meat, so the meat on the core will cook much slower, so you can control the temperature of the meat much easier. Also, you can actually get rarer on the middle and a bit more cooked on the outside, so the whole family will be pleased. Right, on to our steakhouse classic. This array of beef is beautiful, and Checkers has so many varieties of cuts that you'll definitely find something that'll suit your family. So let's kick it off with the most tender cut. This is the fillet. More specifically, this is the Chateaubriand. So traditionally, a cut for two people, which comes off the one end of the fillet. This is great for cooking for two, of course. It's a very lean cut, very tender cut, so it doesn't take much time to cook. This is your least fatty cut of beef. So if you're going for something a little romantic and a little bit fancy, your Chateaubriand is a wonderful cut. Now, if you're wanting to slap something on the braai or into a pan and cook it really quickly, you want texture, you want flavor, then this is an ideal cut. This is the porterhouse steak. So it's got a large amount of fat on the outside, but it also has ripplings of marbling throughout the meat, and that means tenderness. So this, I recommend cooking it fat side down, render off some of that fat, and actually save the fat, and you can make roast potatoes with it. And then sear flesh side on both sides, depending on how well done you like it. A thermometer is always the best way to check the internal temperature of your meat to make sure you're getting it perfect. For medium rare, you want your steak reading to be between 55 and 57 degrees. The rarer, lower, more well done, a higher reading. Right, on to the bone-in steaks. Now, I love cooking steak with a bone on it. First of all, it helps maintain the shape of the steak. So when you're turning it on the braai or in a pan, it helps you control it a little bit more. The bone, once again, is also an insulator, so it helps you control the internal temperature. So it's a little bit more forgiving when the meat is on the bone. It buys you a little more time because remember, the part closest to the bone is going to cook the slowest. But also remember, when you're resting your meat, the part closest to the bone will continue to cook because the bone holds the heat. Right, here we've got a bone-in ribeye, a beautiful, beautiful piece of meat. You can see the fat cap over here, that will render down and become really, really juicy, also very crispy. Now this marbling is what you want ideally in any steak that you're going to choose. Marbling is fat striations throughout the flesh of the meat. These will melt during cooking, and this will make sure that your meat is juicy. So when you're looking for the perfect cut for quick cooking or for braaiing, make sure that it has some marbling. Remember, the fat cap you can cut off after cooking, but the marbling is going to stay within the flesh, and that's what's going to make your steak juicy. So here we've got a bone-in sirloin, also really wonderful, flavorful, lots of marbling throughout that meat, and also cook it on the fat side first. Flavor, flavor, flavor when you're cooking this kind of meat. So one of my family's favorite cuts is the mighty T-bone steak. So this is a 1 kilogram steakhouse classic T-bone. It is the best of both world steak. So on the one side, you've got that tender, soft fillet, and on the other side, you've got that meaty, flavorful porterhouse. So this will give you the best of both. What I love about this 1 kilogram one is that it's great for novice cooks to start out with because it's a thicker cut, so you can control the temperature so much easier. So it gives you a little bit more room for growth when you're handling your meat. So give the T-bone a try. Then sticking with cuts that are ideal for family, here is the 1 kg rump. Now you can see that is a mighty piece of meat. Lots of fat around the edge, render that fat once more, and that you can save for your delicious roast potatoes. Then sear the steak on both sides. So when I cook a steak this size, I recommend that you don't cook it all on top of the braai or in a pan. Sear it on the braai or in the pan and then finish it off in the oven. This will make sure that you can control the internal temperature much easier. Onto the whole fillet. Now this is saved for special occasions. It is a very tender cut. This is traditionally used to make something like a beef Wellington, where you wrap it in mushroom duksel and you wrap it in some pastry. Beautiful showpiece of a piece of steak. Very tender. You can cook it on the braai or in the oven as a whole fillet. You can also cut it into medallions and make individual portions. Here we have a picanha roast. So this is a special kind of roast, no bone in this roast. So this is ideal for doing on the braai, slow and low on the braai. So start it on the fat side. It's got a beautiful fat cap, so that's gonna render and baste the meat from the top. You can also marinate it, spice it how you want, and roast it in the oven. A wonderful cut for a family. Also, if you are wary about a bone-in roast that I recommended earlier, this is a wonderful roast because for carving, it makes things much, much simpler. Also, a very, very flavorful cut. Today, I will be teaching you how to cook the perfect steak. Here, I've got a beautiful 1 kilogram steakhouse classic club steak. It's got an amazing fat cap on the edge, as well as some beautiful marbling to make sure that we're gonna have flavor and juiciness at the end of it. Before we get cooking, let's talk about seasoning steak. So a lot of people like to use a rub to flavor the outside of their steak. Absolutely, that is a wonderful way to add a lot of flavor to your steak. You can use your favorite combination of spices and herbs. Today, we are just sticking to plain salt and pepper and letting the meat speak for itself. You want to not only flavor your meat, but also help tenderize it, and that's a great thing that acid does. So a bit of vinegar, a bit of lemon juice is wonderful. Right, so for our steak, all I'm going to do is season it with some salt. and a generous amount of pepper. Both sides. Now for me, I sear or start searing my steak in a cold pan. This is unusual for most people, but I find that to get that crispy, delicious, melted fat, you want to render out as much of the fat as possible until you're left with a thin, crispy layer, and that happens with a cold pan. So steak in, fat side down, into a cold pan, use your tongs to hold it, and then pan on. The fat will now start to heat up very slowly as the pan heats up, and it'll start melting. So what I'm gonna do is let the fat render, pour it out, and that fat that comes from that beef is absolutely delicious to roast your potatoes in, to use as an oil or fat for sautéing. So you're adding extra flavor to future dishes, and you're not wasting any of that good fat. So you want to make sure that you get all the sides of the fat because you want all of it to be crispy. And what's great about this method is that you can actually cook the steak in its own fat. So if there is a big or thick fat cap, you'll see that a lot of fat will come out of the fat itself, of the steak itself. And searing steak is what really brings out the flavor, and that's what the joy of eating steak is all about. So we brown off the bone. And be patient when you're cooking steak at this stage. For a piece this size, I'm going to finish it off in the oven. I think it's the best way to cook a piece of meat this size. That way you can control the temperature a bit more. But when you're searing, do it gently, do it slowly, take your time, don't rush this process because this is where the maximum flavor happens. Right. So we're browned on all sides. Our fat is looking crispy already. A bit of the fat is rendered off. We don't have too much fat in here, so I'm going to keep that. And now we're going to sear the flesh side. So down on the one side. And at this stage, leave the steak alone. A lot of people want to prick and prod the steak and move it around. Don't do that. Give the meat time to brown. Not only will it stop it from sticking, but it will also make sure that you get an even browning. So just leave it alone. Let it do its thing. And steak will always tell you when it's ready to turn because it'll be simple to turn. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna sear it on both sides for about 2 minutes per side because we're not cooking it completely in the pan like I mentioned. So we just want some color here, and then we're gonna add a bit of flavor before we put it into the oven. Right, while it sears on the other side, flavor time. For me, butter is the best flavor to combine with steak. So a hefty amount of butter into the pan. Then I'm going to flavor it with thyme. You can add rosemary, you can add oregano, you can add your favorite herb, but make sure it's a hard or robust herb just because it's going to go through a vigorous amount of cooking. Then to that, I'm going to add some garlic. So this is just a couple of cloves. And I'm just going to smash the garlic. Just to break the skins and make sure that the flavor is going to come out of that. Then at this stage, it's time to baste our steak with all this delicious herb and butter juices. So basically we're pan roasting and encouraging the flavor to develop. The butter and the meat juices are all going to mix together. Delicious. So what you're looking for here is to just keep basting your steak until the butter is nutty and golden brown, and then we're gonna stick it into the oven and let that roast for about 10 to 15 minutes because I like mine on the medium rare side. And something really, really important when you're cooking steak, when you're cooking any of the amazing 19 mature cuts available at Checkers, is always rest your meat after cooking. Not only does it enhance the flavor, but it ensures that your end result will be juicy and succulent. Right. This now goes into a preheated 200-degree oven for 10 to 15 minutes. Right, our steak is ready. Get it out the oven. Looking and smelling delicious. So out it comes onto a plate. Tent it with foil. So I cook this for about 10 to 15 minutes. So ideally, I want to rest it for the same amount of time. Longer is better. Our meat is rested. Time to uncover. Oh, smells incredible. So don't throw away those juices. That is delicious, meaty flavor and buttery goodness. So to carve this off the bone, I always serve the bone with it because to nibble on the bone is a delicious thing. So take it off the bone. So run your knife as close to the bone as possible. And you can see how, as I carve, the juices aren't running all over the board, and that's what resting does. It ensures that the juices stay inside the meat where you want them. Relatively thick slices. Beautiful pink interior. And this inside, no matter how pink it is, should always be warm. And you guarantee that you'll get that if you make sure that you cook your steak from room temperature. Right, let's plate it up. Bone first, and then basically just reassemble the steak for presentation on the board. By displaying it like this, you make sure that every single piece is going to get the right amount of seasoning. So on with a little bit of salt to season the core. And there it is. Remember, I said don't waste those juices. So and there you have it, perfectly cooked steak. Time for me to taste. Meat does not get better than this. So now let's move on to pork. Here I've got two beautiful farmstead pork ribeyes. Well, I'm here to tell you that farmstead pork is reared with the highest hygienic standards, so please try this delicious pork. It comes in many delicious cuts, so no longer are we just limited to pork chops or pork fillet. This, like I said, is pork ribeye. Also available is pork rump, so pick a cut and enjoy it. You can actually eat pork slightly pink in the center, just to guarantee that it is going to stay moist. However, you can absolutely fully cook it, but if you do want a juicier piece of pork at the end, you may eat it pink. Pork is also a great cut of meat, a lean cut of meat, if you're sort of watching your cholesterol. Now, I love the flavor of spice to go along with my pork, so I'm going to also season mine with a little bit of paprika. A bit of smoked paprika would be really great, sweet paprika. You could even use your favorite spice blend. A bit of garam masala would be wonderful here, even just a pinch of curry powder. So rub the seasoning all over the pork, making sure you get it on both sides. And then because I want to sear this at a high temperature, I'm actually going to oil the meat and not the pan. A touch of olive oil. Rub that in. So while I massage this in, for me and my family, pork isn't something that we ate a lot growing up, but we have grown to love it over the years. My sister would, for many, many years, not touch pork at all. She also was one of the people who thought of it as, she was weary of pork. But until I cooked it in the same way that I cook steak. So making sure that it's juicy, making sure that it's flavorful on the outside. And now she's converted. So, right, pan on. Pork into a searing hot pan. And we're just going to brown this pork on both sides. So I'm going to sear it in the pan and then into a preheated 200-degree oven to finish cooking while I make a delicious mushroom sauce. And the smell of paprika is really delicious. It'll get your taste buds tingling. So these steaks have more than just two sides, so we make sure we give the sides love as well. oven has been preheated to 200 degrees. And pork steaks this size will take about 10 minutes in the oven. With pork as well, important with these type of steaks to rest the meat. Resting your meat results in the juiciest pork cut you will get. So make sure after you've roasted it, set it aside, cover it with foil and leave it to rest into the oven. So while that roasts away, let's make a delicious exotic mushroom sauce. Use the same pan because all those pork juices and that paprika flavor is in the pan. Just turn it down slightly. So here I've got some exotic mushrooms. So just tear them. I think that mushrooms look better if they're torn organically. There we go. Mushrooms are wonderful with pork because they hold a wonderful texture, so they're a textural component, and also mushrooms absorb whatever flavor you put them with. So this mustard cream sauce to go along with the pork is going to be absolutely delicious. And pork and mustard are one of those classic combinations that you can't go wrong with. A little bit more olive oil just to get everything frying nicely. So while these saute, let's get some seasoning in there. So I'm gonna do a bit of salt, a little bit of pepper as well. And then I'm going to add some chopped garlic to this. And then in goes whole grain mustard. Delicious. And some decadent cream. And then simmer this for about 2 to 5 minutes until everything thickens, and then we're going to finish it off with some chives. Right, our pork is ready to come out of the oven and rest. We don't want to leave it in the roasting dish because it'll continue to cook. So onto the plate. Then we're going to tint it with some foil. Cover with foil and leave it to rest for about 10 to 15 minutes. Our sauce is ready. All this needs is some beautiful, fresh, crispy greens, and we're ready to serve. Delicious. Right, let's talk roast chicken. Often people are afraid to roast or cook a whole bird because they're unsure about how long to cook it, how you know when it's done, how to flavor it properly. Well, I'm here to help you out. First of all, the breast often gets very, very dry, so you want to make sure that you add a bit of fat to secure the breast and make sure that it is actually succulent and flavorful at the end. So how I do this is I add a layer of butter, but you want to add the butter under the skin so it bastes that breast while it cooks. So here I've got some room temperature butter. All I want to do to that is season it with some black pepper and salt because you want to add flavor as well as fat, and butter does that wonderfully. Then also for a bit of added color, we've got some chopped parsley. Goes. And just mash this together. Pull the skin away from the breast just to sort of loosen it. It is attached by a membrane. So just pinch it a bit first. And then go from the neck side and stick your hand underneath. You'll find if your hand sticks too much, wet your hand and it'll sort of glide in there. And just pull the skin away from the breast. Then once you've done that, you want to take your softened butter. Pop the butter under there. So then just sort of pull the skin back over and use the skin to sort of push the butter down the rest of the breast so everything gets a little bit of that delicious flavored butter. It's going to be basted beautifully during roasting. So the breast is taken care of. Now it's time to flavor the rest of the bird. So I like to use a spice rub, a wet spice rub. So I add a bit of oil to it. You can do a dry rub as well. You can just use your favorite combination of spices and herbs. My favorite combination is a bit of paprika, which I'm going to pop into a bowl. Then some dried oregano. You could use fresh oregano. You could use some thyme as well. Then I've got some ground coriander, delicious, and a little bit of ground cumin as well. So to this you could add some garlic if you wanted. You could add a bit of ginger to this. You can go wild with your spice choice. Then for added flavor, I love to add a bit of Dijon mustard. This helps wetten the mixture as well, so it's going to give us a bit of moisture, which is lovely. Give that a mix. And then I'm going to add a drizzle of olive oil just to loosen everything. At this stage, my oven is preheated to 200 degrees. Now, the trick for most people is cooking the chicken for the right amount of time. So I have a rule for you that you can apply to any size chicken and you know that you're going to get the perfect roast chicken. So preheat your oven to 200 degrees. Make sure you know or take note of the weight of your chicken. So you want to cook it at 200 degrees for 20 minutes per 500 grams, plus an additional 20 minutes. And once that cooking time is over, take it out of the oven and leave the bird to rest. That will ensure that you get perfect roast chicken every time. Right, our spice rub is looking good. Onto the chicken, and the key to getting the flavor in there is getting your hands dirty and massaging this delicious spice mix into all the parts of your chicken. So, make sure you turn the bird over. You want to get the back of it as well. Get those chicken wings. Get under there. So make sure you cover the entire chicken. So I also make sure that I rub into the cavity. So when you're doing a roast, I don't encourage you to stuff anything sort of solid in the cavity. That, of course, will prevent air circulation from going inside the cavity and make your bird cook for a much longer time. So don't stuff anything solid in there. You could put sort of half a lemon in there that's loose. It'll perfume it. Right, chicken is ready to go into the preheated 200-degree oven. I'm going to wash my hands and we'll get it roasted. Carve the chicken, serve the pieces, but save the carcass and use it to make stock. So give your chicken an extra lifespan. So into a pot of water with some aromatics, some onions, some celery, some carrots, cold water, your chicken carcass, bring that to a boil, simmer it for about 45 minutes, and you have delicious, fresh chicken stock. And there you have it. We've come to the end of my Checkers Masterclass on all things meat. I hope that you've learned some valuable information. And remember, if you are still feeling intimidated when you walk into your Checkers butchery, make use of the amazing expert butchers. Until next time, happy cooking.